And I welcome the opportunity to speak on what is a fairly significant piece of legislation. The establishment of a corporate enforcement authority as a standalone entity replacing the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement is an extremely welcome step, and we're on the record as having welcomed this on more than one occasion. The ODCE has worked hard within the remit that it has in recent times. Unfortunately, in the course of their work, the ODCE has often suffered from a lack of funding and resources on one hand and a lack of adequate powers on the other. It's ultimately these shortcomings which precipitated the proposal for the establishment of a standalone corporate enforcement authority as far back as 2017. This move was proposed by the then government in November as part of a series of measures intended to address white-collar crime. The establishment of this new agency is in part a response to severe criticism by Judge John Aylmer of the conduct of the ODCE in the prosecution of Sean Fitzpatrick, the former chairman of Anglo-Irish Bank. In May 2017, Judge Aylmer described the acquittal of Mr Fitzpatrick following evidence of severe deficiencies in the ODCE's handling of evidence and preparation of the prosecution's case. Therefore, if this new agency is to be able to investigate and respond to complex breaches of company law, then unlike the ODCE, it must have the necessary funding, resources, powers, suitably qualified experts in accountancy, information technology and corporate enforcement in order to do that job effectively. The need for such resources and funding came to the fore when pre-legislative scrutiny of this bill was conducted earlier in the year. There was unanimity among the members of the Enterprise, Trade and Employment Committee for the need for a standalone corporate enforcement authority which is funded and resourced to tackle white-collar crime head-on. There is a perception amongst the public, and some of it, I have to say, is fairly well-founded, that corruption and so-called white-collar crime is not adequately detected and punished. The lack of legislation to tackle corporate and economic crime and the underfunding and under-resourcing of the agencies investigating white-collar crime has been de facto government policy for decades. Over a decade and 3 successive governments later, the lack of appetite to legislate, regulate and properly tackle corporate and economic crime is simply shocking. The historic underfunding of the ODCE is a political decision. The office gets its funding directly from government, and if that funding is insufficient, then that represents a political failure. In 2007, the accounting firm RSM Robson Rhodes estimated that Ireland was losing €2.5 billion a year from economic crime. Economic cheats cheat us all, as they might say. If that figure is applied the past 14 years, that's a potential loss of €35 billion to the Irish economy. The economic and social costs of corruption and white-collar crime far outweigh other forms of crime, and yet it has consistently received far less funding, resources and political attention from successive governments. It is time the state takes this crime seriously, and as the ODCE transitions to a standalone corporate enforcement authority, it is imperative that it is not only given additional funding and resources, but additional powers to help keep pace with technological advancements, such as seizing data and information that is stored in the cloud. The collapse of the retrial of Sean Fitzpatrick and the ensuing criticism of the investigation highlighted the need for additional resources and structural changes for the ODCE. Indeed, the ODCE has some crucial work ongoing currently, such as the investigation into the Football Association of Ireland. It is imperative, given what happened at the trial and the implications of the recent 2017 Supreme Court decision on data and privacy rights, that every single necessary resource requested by the ODCE in their investigation into the FAI is provided so that that can be conducted and done so in a timely manner. This is a huge investigation with significant public interest, especially amongst football fans all across the island, and there can be no excuse for the ODCE not receiving additional funding and resources. This legislation and the establishment of a new corporate enforcement authority must severely crack down on economic and white-collar crime. Not only that, but it must do so with such severity that the public are convinced that the state is finally taking these crimes seriously. There are many positives to this legislation beyond the establishment of the authority, such as granting the authority autonomy over the deployment of its resources. That's important, and I know my colleague Dr Quinlivan will go into this in more detail. I must come to a point of concern, however, and speaking with my colleagues about this legislation, it was a point that we all have concerns about, and I'm sure that many will speak about it here today as well. One such area of concern is section 944AE, subsection 3 points B and C. I'd like to ask the Minister why the name of a director who is sanctioned by the authority why they should be able to escape their name being publicised if such a publication would, and I'm quoting from the legislation, from the bill here, point B, jeopardise the stability of financial markets. Furthermore, in point C, it goes on to state that a director who is sanctioned shall not have their name published if it would cause disproportionate damage to the relevant director. These sections seem to offer an almost unlimited get-out for relevant directors who commit offences. And I didn't come in here with a crystal ball, but I'd be willing to guess that if it goes through without amendment, that we won't see many names in the public domain. And I think that that would be regrettable, and I don't think that's the intention. But I do think having this sort of get-out-of-jail card is not a good idea. There's no reason why these points should be included to allow directors get away from having their names made public. There's no mechanism for a young working class man or woman to escape their name being splashed in the local paper if a court finds them guilty of being in possession of a joint or some other crime. This seems to be a case of the government. It seems to be a case of the government looking after their own, and I hope that the Minister will be able to address that concern. It is an area which we will be seeking to amend at committee stage. Secondly, some of the insightful suggestions raised during the PLS by Professor Deirdre Ahern in her submission are absent from the bill that we have in front of us. The suggestion that the authority will consist of at least one member and not more than 3 members has entered the bill in section 944F. In her written submission during PLS, Professor Ahern stated that 1 member with an upper threshold of 3 is surprising, and she recommended that this be revised upwards to a minimum of 2 and up to 5. The reason for this is that a single-member decision-making authority is not a good position to be in, and that cost savings should not outweigh buttressing important substantive and procedural considerations that help to ensure the integrity of decision-making regarding the compliance and enforcement limbs that are the backbone of our corporate law system. It is an area that we will strongly consider for amendment of the bill at committee stage. Finally, we are supporting this bill at second stage. We're committed to working with the Minister and with his department on this. The department, to their credit, have been extremely helpful to date through the many PLS hearings that have taken place going back to earlier this year and in the last Dáil term as well. We intend to work constructively as the bill goes through committee and report stage, and we hope that through this process we can pass a really important piece of legislation that is fit for purpose and will ensure a corporate enforcement agency with teeth that can go after crimes and criminals that have evaded the law in this state for far too long.